At the same time, Minho University in Portugal. So he is wearing double hats. It must be very busy. He is also a coordinator of the BA and MA programs in IR and diplomacy at Portugalense University in Porto, in Portugal. And he is a coordinator of the research group, Democracy and Governance for the 21st Century. He is teaching IR theory, political science, international responsibility, and he is actively researching democratization processes, European studies, identity issues, and social constructivism. He received his PhD from Universidade Nova de Lisboa with his thesis, A Constructivist Perspective on EU's Democracy Promotion in Turkey. And he also turned this into a wonderful book. If you are working on Turkey and EU relations, you should consult his book as a main source. He has published in national and international IR journals and participated in several conferences worldwide, and has been awarded with several prizes and scholarships. I'm going to show you the cover of his book, EU's Democracy Promotion in Turkey, which was published in 2015 by Nota de Rodape in Paris. And his current article, many congratulations for this one.
Thank you, thank you.
Very recent one, Foreign Presence and Export Performance, the Role of Portuguese Commercial Diplomacy, was published by the International Trade Journal. This is wonderful. So, dear Andre, if I left anything out, please remind me.
No, not at all. Thank you. Thank you.
You are an excellent academic and an excellent friend, also a great person. So it's an honor for me to welcome you today.
Thank you. Thank you, Vivian. Thank you very much for this kind presentation. Well, first of all, good evening, everyone, again. First and foremost, let me thank Professor Didem for this kind invitation, and to all of you who decided to join this session, which I hope that meets your expectations for a Friday evening plan. Professor Didem is a very dear friend of mine, someone who I really admire, not only as an academic, but also as a human being. So thank you very much for this invitation. And for the very kind and generous presentation. It is always an honor to talk to international students, especially Turkish students, Turkish colleagues, and even more specifically to Izmir University, since Izmir was the first city that I visited in Turkey lots of years ago. So I have this kind of emotional connection with Izmir. You have a lovely city, and well, so it's really an honor. It's just a pity that we cannot do this in presence. Well, actually my presence there in Turkey, but also Professor Didem's presence here in Porto. As Professor Didem, Professor Didem already presented me well with lots of attributes. My name is Andre Matos, and actually democracy has been one of the issues that I've studied. Now I'm a little bit more focused on, as you've seen in my latest article, on trade, commercial, economic diplomacy due to an international project that I'm involved in, more specifically looking at the Portuguese experience, which is something that I'm enjoying really much. But I also study, or I keep looking at Turkish reality, the Middle East in general. Early this morning, I had the opportunity to talk about the future of Syria in an event held at Portugalense University as well, with lots of other academics and practitioners. It was really interesting. Well, but now I'm here to talk about democracy. And I would like to share my screen, if that's okay. That it helps with some figures and images. I'll use theoretically speaking, I'll use this most of my well, the theoretical work that I've developed, my thesis, is some things that I've added in the meanwhile, and therefore here we are talking about democracy. So if you want to ask something, you can interrupt me, or you can keep your questions until the end of the presentation. It's really up to you. Do as you feel more comfortable. And let's look a little bit at this well, this concept. Okay, so well, the concept of democracy, to begin with, represents a very complex and dynamic reality. That's what makes it so difficult to study. Probably one of the most complex. Concepts within the vocabulary of social sciences, because it encompasses lots of realities, lots of issues, and also because when we talk about democracy, there is an ideological side that enters in this discussion. So what I've tried to do, and lots of academics, who I follow, actually try to do, is actually to try to look at it at a more distant, less ideological perspective. Even though this entails high risks, because as you know, well, and since as Professor Didem presented me, I'm a social constructivist, which means that I pay a lot of attention to the meanings that agents and individuals and communities attribute to the reality. So one thing that I would like to begin with by saying is that the concept of democracy is a really complex one because of several issues, but also because of the perceptions of the way that people want to be governed or ruled or organized, politically organized. So, as you know, the states are political forms of organization. People in general, communities decided to organize, lots of them, not all of them, but lots of the communities decided to organize themselves in the forms of states. And in order to work, those communities chose at a certain point in their history democracy as a way of managing the relationship between the ones that rule and the ones that are ruled. So this is the idea.
Dear Andres, so sorry for interrupting you.
Yes.
Maybe your microphone is giving us some sounds that
sorry
make it a bit difficult for
better?
us.
Yes, I'm sorry. Is it better like this?
We are still hearing it. I don't know why. Maybe it's because of some connection.
Okay, so let me try to switch it. Just a moment, please. Let me see if I can change here the origin of the sound.
Is it because of? It's like a black and white TV.
Yes. And now, how is it?
It's much better. Thank you.
Is it? Okay, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Okay, is it better right now? Okay, yes. Good. Because I was with my earphones, but the sound was being used from the web camera, and that's probably one of the reasons. So I'm sorry. So as I was saying, well, previously just thanking Professor Didem and then presenting the concept of democracy, basically in a nutshell, in 10 seconds. So the concept of democracy, well, I was saying that democracy is a very complex concept. I don't think it's something that's going to be solved academically with a consensual definition or something, because as I told you, well, communities decided to organize themselves in the form of states, and states as a set of institutions needed to define how the rulers and the ruled ones would
interact with each other. And how should we do that? There's no clear, no obvious answer. So if you look, for example, at the presidentialist system in the United States, or the parliamentarian system in the UK, or even the semi-presidentialist system in Portugal, you look at three different ways of organizing the political or the governance system. And the three ways are democratic per se, but they entail very different relationship between the ones who vote. There are, as you know, there are more direct or less direct ways of democracy in terms of referenda, political participation, civil society, the roles and the powers of different institutions, like a president, for example, or a monarch, and the lack of power, and the assemblies, and so on and so forth. So this is, I would say, my basic the background about democracy. Everything that I'm going to present to you today is not fixed or absolute right, or it's not let's say it's not written in the stone. It's just a couple of thoughts about how we can look at democracy, and a dimension that may interest us a little bit more, which is the international promotion of democracy, which raises lots of ethical questions, considering should we do that, basically? Is any state entitled to try to show or to sell or to force any other state to adopt that vision of a political system? Either you call it democracy or not, because, as you know, it is very difficult for us to find universal global values, because we are very different from each other. Each community has its features, its identities, its perceptions, and we don't want, well, I don't want at least to consider this kind of superiority, Western superiority over other communities, because they're just different ways of managing politics. So this is my background and things that we should keep in mind when we are discussing, when we are talking about democracy. There are therefore several different proposals to conceive, to understand. If you look at a more quantitative dimension, to operationalize the concept of democracy, which makes any attempt to embrace it a very difficult task. And if you join democracy, quality of democracy, the European Union and Turkey, I think that you find the perfect triangle for disaster, I would say, because there are lots of, well, we are talking about three major themes, well, in international relations, in political science, which are particularly complex because of several situations, as you know. So it is a very contested concept, but the spread of democracy alongside with the studies of democracy have been a reality, mainly since the 19th century. If you look at Samuel Huntington's, for example, in 1991, he divides this democratization of the world into three different and widely referenced and very famous waves of democratization. Mainly after the two world wars, both triggered by unstable democracies and susceptible social situations, democracy started to be perceived as the only regime that seemed to work, since both fascism and communism failed, and the longest established democracies showed relatively success in providing their citizens with the conditions for them to fulfill their needs and wishes. Because by the end of the day, that's what I would say, that's what marks or characterizes democracy. The idea is that the sovereignty lies in the people, demos kratos, the power to the people, and it means that if we as individuals and as a group are the ones who are entitled with actual power, so we should choose our political representatives or our choices, even if it is direct practices of democracy. So the idea And that's why I like democracy studies so much, is because we are talking about a respect for human dignity and a respect for individuals' opinions and perceptions and visions. As a Democrat, for example, when we look at a result of a referendum, even if it doesn't meet what we consider to be the cleverest, the wisest decision, the most strategic one, because we may belong to an elite who may think different from the masses, for example, it really doesn't matter, because even if you belong to an elite or the masses or whatever, I mean, each one of us has his or her own position in in governing the society, the community. And that's exactly what I think that it's more important about democracy. But democracy diffusion became part of a broader process of exchange between cultures, of models and products of different kinds in a globalized world. Because due to globalization, the world exported, or countries exported and exchanged not only goods, not only products, not only restaurant chains, but also ideas, but also ways of doing things. So you visit Turkey, you see how Turkey works at a political level, you learn some things and you bring them home. You visit Portugal, the UK, South Africa, and you see here people may have a vote or a say about this or that in this way. So globalization, this global village, brings not only the exchange of products, materially speaking, but also of ideas. We host, fortunately, several Turkish students here at Portucalense University in exchange programs, Erasmus programs, and also professors. And we go to Turkey as well. That's exchanging these views about political aspects of governance, of ruling, and actually maturing these ideas of how different things could be better in a certain way. So if we're talking about democratization, for example, it means that democracy exerts some type of appeal that justifies some populations' fights to achieve democracy, to install democracy, to consolidate democracy in their own countries. And so I would say, to begin with, that democracy can be defined by what it is not, an autocracy, right? So to keep things clean in the beginning, at least. So if you look at this scheme, this political continuum that I have in my book, and that I keep using because I think it's really visual, and we talk about this logic that traces a political continuum in which one of the extremes is democracy and the other is an autocratic regime. This is just for pedagogical purposes, okay? Because reality is never anything like that, fortunately for some reasons and unfortunately for others. Throughout this line, we can put different political systems that are defined by their democratization degree. And so any non-democratic regime could be understood as a form of governance that, denying their citizens the possibility of political participation, has as priority the state's interests, exercising the power arbitrarily, as Gianfranco Pasquino wrote, as this very famous political science that you know. So, however, inside this wider group, it is possible to find more specific political systems, such as many forms of authoritarianisms, totalitarianisms, post-totalitarianism, sultanates, many hybrid democracies, semi-democracies. There are lots of names that academics have been giving to these options. However, if an undemocratic regime is established, some changes have to occur in order to modify that situation, so that the country enters in a transition period that might eventually lead it to democracy. Yet, as we know, this change is not easy because it has to overcome the obstacles of the resistance of previous regimes, for example, such as economic success, which is a very convincing argument for a regime, either a democratic or autocratic regime. If we are doing well, economically speaking, why changing? Why risking something different that may bring poverty to some or less wealth, for example? The repressive logic or the power of the leaders, for example, they may exert such an ambiance that makes people less prone to opt for another political regime. Okay, I would say that I would say that ideally people have a respect for the general will, and so the political systems may vary a lot, as you know. However, sooner or later, some internal and external dynamics begin to come up and to promote a more or less favorable context to transition. And this movement becomes of utmost importance since the institution and the quality of the future democracy depend on the development of this phase. So we have, as you can see here, democratization as a concept that includes these three phases: liberalization, transition, and consolidation. So the idea is that we are moving from the autocratic regime towards a democratic regime, and all of that, we can call it democratization. What is liberalization? Liberalization means opening up the regime. There are some changes, some measures that open the regime. There are what we call the preconditions for transition, a preparation for transition. And this preparation can be led by agents, the structure, some particular conditions, and we can look both at civil society as a fundamental actor, and also elites, because elites can hamper or make it harder for a regime to change, or help it, or even civil society as well. So there are lots of studies about the impact and the importance of elites and the masses in terms of promoting democracy and transition. On the other hand, we have structure. On this side, we have variables such as economic development, social, civil, and psychological prerequisites like political culture. Does this community know what a democracy is? Do they have a collective memory of what it means? And do they want to come back to that? Or is it completely new? On the other side, we have history. We have the features, more or less repressive features of the regime that is installed. And something that is pushing me towards today's major focus, which is the international environment. Are there agents trying to promote democratic transition? How are they doing it? By force, like the US usually does, by normative power, as the EU wants to do, sometimes more successfully than others, just by example, just by inspiring, and so on and so forth. So, and my focus will be precisely this international environment, international organizations, international promotion of democracy, and that's precisely my focus. Then we have transition. Transition is just, according to, I'd like to underline this, according to my definition, okay, not most definitions, my definitions, for me, transition is a very short period in time in which we have a factual change in the regime. So if you have a coup d'etat, if you have a revolution, or if you have a change of regime, and then you make a new constitution and a new government is elected, transition ends there. But you may ask, but Professor, does that mean that you elect a democratically elected government and you are a democracy of a sudden after decades of authoritarianisms, for example? No, we enter the consolidation phase. Consolidation phase following this rationale that I'm presenting to you means this complete institutionalization, and I'm quoting, you can read from Pridham and Haag work, institutionalization of a new system, the adoption of its rules and procedures, and the spread of democratic values. As we all know as social scientists, mimicking institutions, imitating institutions is very easy and straightforward. You want an assembly, you want a parliament, you want a president, you want courts, you want a government. It's really easy to build, right? You just create the rules, you create institutions. What is difficult is that individuals, the community, understands the rules, that the community plays by the rules. I always give this very interesting example, and I say interesting example for a very Western Portuguese vision of democracy and of political system, because as you may know, we had a revolution in '74, and ever since we've been a democracy. We usually perform well, lots of shortcomings, of course, and problems that all systems have, but I would say that a generally well democratic performance, ranking in top 10 or top 20 of international organizations rankings, just to framework this condition. But for example, in Afghanistan, in some periods, in some contexts, imagine the occurrence of elections. Okay, elections are easy to assemble. Elections are easy to hold. Look at Syrian examples. I was talking about that this morning. 95% of Syrians voted for Assad, which means that, well, elections were there. So elections are easy to organize. The problem is all the other things that we know that make those elections or that procedure just an empty reality, an empty concept that is kind of a lack of adjustment between the concept and its true meaning, what it was supposed to do, which is to represent a popular will. And when, for example, President Bashar al-Assad just allows the occurrence of elections in government-controlled zones, well, this is kind of a deviation from democracy, because not everyone is entitled to participate. Just people who President al-Assad wants to participate. So you see, so this is kind of a disconnection. We have elections, formally speaking, okay, but we do not have the real meaning and participation and respect for what people really want. And that's why I defend that, I stand for this idea of consolidation as a very long period. It's not only mimicking institutions, but also internalizing those rules, those values, the meaning of democracy, saying that if I want to give my opinion about something, I may give it without fear. And I was talking about Afghanistan, and just to complete this example, okay, elections were held, but the head of the family, the father, asked people in the electoral polls to give him the voting sheets for his entire family. He wanted to cast not only his individual vote, but also his family's votes. What is this? Well, this is precisely the phase of consolidation. There are elections. We are not discussing if they are valid, free, and fair. Okay, it's another issue. But there are an individual that grew in a certain environment that makes him believe that he's entitled to choose for other people. Okay, and I'm not criticizing this. I would like to underline that. I'm just saying that this is an internal adaptation of an external promotion. How fair, how reasonable, how wise that is, it's kind of an ethical issue that we can discuss, of course, but which is another step. So back into the theoretical dimension. So consolidation is very complex, is very lengthy, is very uncertain. It doesn't always mean progress, okay? It does not mean that you make your transition now and in 10 years you will be a super democracy fulfilling all the criteria and respecting gender equality, respect for minorities, human rights, political participation, and so on and so forth. There are several steps that are taken. I always use Andreas Schadler's model. This is a 1990s something model, but I think it's really interesting because Andreas Schadler, different from other authors, understands that consolidation may entail positive or negative movements, meaning that, so if you look at this scheme here, so we have autocratic regimes, and we have what we call the zero moment of democracy, elections. If you have elections, you are formally speaking entering the democratic regime. But it's very different if you only hold elections free and fair, more or less free and more or less fair, or if you respect lots of other criteria that puts you in this theoretically created, advanced, perfect democracy. So we have lots of steps, of stages, of phases. And Andreas Schadler created this scheme that I usually, it's from 1998, but I think it's really clever. Look, we are, democratic consolidation does not always mean completing democracy or deepening democracy. It may mean that you have a liberal democracy, but you backslide to an electoral democracy. In this year, 2021, we have more autocracies in the world than democracies. 52% of the world population, according to several international organizations, live in autocratic regimes. And this is a novelty because the last time that this happened was in 2001, 2 decades ago. So it means that, look, we have certain waves, democratization waves, autocratization waves, and we need to look at this. We can discuss it further. It's not really the focus of my presentation today, but the reasons behind this. And I think this is more serious than having lots of lunatics or kind of weird political leaders spread throughout the world. It's more serious than that. We are talking about people that do not feel identified with this political organization. They don't trust politicians. So that's why they elected a clown in Brazil for the assembly, for the Senate. And this is true. This is not a metaphor. Tiririca was his name, and he presented himself dressed and professionally as a clown, and he was elected. And this, even though this is not a metaphor, this is real, this happened, we need to understand the message behind this. In Brazil as well, gangsters and criminals were elected for public offices. It means that people are trying other alternatives. I mean, serious politicians did not solve my problem. So why not try some things, some different things? What happened in 1933 in Germany was just that. I'm starving. This republic hasn't solved my problems. I can't earn enough money to provide for my family. So this guy here says that he's going to solve things. Now we have a more complex situation because we have access to lots of information, social media, and so on and so forth. We are way more informed, but at the same time, less informed because of disinformation and propaganda and so on and so forth. So things are much more complex now. So why are people disconnected from democratic regimes? Why are people letting that autocratic leaders pave their way? So, and I think that we as academics, as in academy, students, everyone, the civil society in general, should think about this. What is the solution? Is to bring people closer to decision-making process. But do individuals want to be every day? Because as you know, there is this enthusiasm with e-democracy, electoral democracy, not in the sense of casting an electronic vote, which is something that's really easy, but is that you have an app on your phone, and you choose to vote for or against a bill, a proposal of law, for example. So would this solve the democratic crisis, for example? We don't know. I know for sure that that would create some issues. First, a gap between those who have access to information, to apps, to smartphones, to education, and those who don't, who would would be kept from access to political decision-making as well. They would not be represented, because this is kind of the agora, the Greek practice of direct democracy in today's mechanisms and technologies. There are lots of suggestions that have been made, but my question is, do we, as individuals, want to come home in the evening tired, sometimes not really happy, sometimes happier, and look at your phone and see, what do I think about this bill to improve budget for public electricity? Is it fair to demand that from people? Would that bring people closer to political decision making? Yes, directly speaking. But do people have this responsibility, or did we create the representative system in a way to avoid this more concrete decision making, because we have other issues to solve in our lives, because we are not politicians and we are not professionals, we have lots of other things to consider. Okay, and what about technical issues? Am I competent enough to decide matters of foreign policy, or public spending, or chemical products for agriculture, for example? So lots of things come to this question. So I won't explain all of this in detail. You can read it in my book or in my thesis. I can give you access to it if you want. I can send it to Professor Didem to share it with you. And I'm not going into much detail about the operationalization of the concept, which is something that's really theoretical, methodological, but it's not really the focus. I wanted just to talk also about international promotion of democracy, raise some questions more than give you the answers, because actually I think that usually that's my role, to raise the questions rather than the answers. So international promotion of democracy was a forgotten variable for lots of time. People only looked within the political system. So how can we promote or consolidate democracy? And they looked within the borders of a political system. Then we shifted, and democracy promotion became a fashionable international art. Several actors involved, different approaches, different agendas, different objectives, different reasons and motives. And this internal-external debate was reduced at a certain moment to just only what comes from abroad matters, which is exactly the opposite dynamic. Nowadays, we refuse, and I mean academia in general, refuse a zero-sum solution for this. We just say what we call, what Magan and Morlino called a democratic anchoring. So this is a way of saying that democratization is an internal process with external influences. So it's not the winner takes all, right? It's not only the internal or all the external, because external influences are interpreted by the local communities and the national realities. But the national realities cannot also ignore what's going around them. So I think that this is a very clever way to solve this, saying that we have an interaction. The focus now is to understand how much of these variables influence the democratization process. And that's why we have lots of studies, a very extensive literature on this. But how do international actors promote democracy? Several ways, several patterns. I would divide them into what we see here in this left side, what we call material mechanisms, ideational mechanisms. We have hard power as a mechanism of external democracy promotion. You know several examples. Look at Iraq, for example. What the US did was a direct intervention to promote democracy. Of course, we can discuss this, the reasons behind it. But we can also have indirect interventions. We can have states or international organizations funding, training, and doing other strategies to indirectly force democratization. We also have conditionality, which is European Union's preferred way, the carrot and stick policy. Turkey knows that very well. All the candidate countries know that very well, and even member states know that very well. If you don't reach such a certain outcome, you will be punished or you will be rewarded if you do. So we have the negative and positive political conditionality, meaning that if you do not respect minority rights, I will not pursue with you more favorable trade conditions, for example. Or if you do not fulfill with certain conditions, you will not proceed with the candidacy process, enlargement process. On the other hand, we have ideational aspects. The sun is hitting my window, so I think that I have kind of an aura right now. It's I'm sorry, I think I can't solve this very well right now, but okay, I can do this. Okay, so it's the sun of knowledge and democracy promotion shining in Porto. So as I was saying, ideational aspects such as socialization and emulation. There are other ways of promoting democracy. For example, Erasmus program. Erasmus program is a socialization strategy. Students live in one country, study in another. They see democracy working or not working, and they bring with them some ideas, some expectations. And youngsters are the future decision makers, the voters, the influential civil society. And we have other strategies like that. We also have emulation. Emulation means contagion or convergence. It is a more active or a more spontaneous or more intentional process. For example, you are surrounded by political systems that understand that that apply, for example, semi-presidentialism. You start looking, you see that's a more complex system, but it may work. And then you emulate that example. You are not forced. You don't even have incentives. You just look at the other example and you start thinking, would that work for me? Many critics of international promotion of democracy say that this is not promotion of democracy. This is an internal adaptation. Just looking abroad and seeing other examples, say that may work here. And this is considered as, I don't like to say natural because I'm a constructivist, so it's nothing about nature here, but is about, let's say, a more genuine, in the sense of is saying that no one forced me to accept their vision of democracy. And also, you can compare it, for example, you can compare it with hard power and direct intervention, which is exactly the opposite. Why did democracy promotion fail in Iraq? Because Western-like democracies were not built upon these sociological, anthropological structures that are present in Iraq. So this idea of taking a political system and just moving it without asking, just saying, I know that this will be better for you. This is kind of a more paternalistic approach. It's like what we do to our children, right? We say, we know better. We know better. Actually, parents do, because we are older than the children and more experienced, I would say. But this does not apply between equal states, sovereign states, I would say, because states not only have equal sovereignty, but they also have very different experiences and visions about reality. Anthropological organizations, tribes, for example, hierarchical structures that should be respected, and some democratic models being exported, like the US did in Iraq, for example, does not respect that reality. So this is something that's like forced. And this is, well, basically the opposition between the difference between material and ideational aspects of democracy promotion. So I don't know how much time I do have, Didem. I'm sorry, because I usually lose track, or if I have over exceeded it.
Dear Andre, it's already, I think, 10 p.m. here, so it's been 1 hour. It's really up to you. If you wish to continue a little bit, we are happy to listen.
Okay, so I will. Okay, so I will wrap up. Well, in 1 minute, just not to leave things like this, and then I'm free to listen and to answer to all your questions and comments. Because your reality is really different from mine. So your perception is necessarily different from mine. And that's what makes this so interesting. So, the idea of international promotion of democracy has, I would say, and just coming to this, just this final scheme here. Each international actor has its own agenda. The reasons to promote democracy. Some may be more genuine in terms of promoting real democracy. I mean, I genuinely want other communities to feel respected. Some others may have other interests. Russia promotes its own form of political governance, which is very different from Western liberal democracies, as you know. So democracy promotion by Russia is not exactly the same as by Sweden, the Nordic countries, which try to export social liberalization. Japan, economic liberalization. United States, political liberalization, a very top-down approach, sometimes coercively, using military means. Then we have international organizations such as the European Union, the Council of Europe, United Nations, World Bank, all of them, and even NATO, all of them have strategies to promote democracy or to promote their vision of democracy, which raises ethical issues depending on where are they promoting it and how are they promoting it? So we have lots of I would say, advantages and positive side of international promotion of democracy, such as trying to extend, and I would say that that is genuinely a very good thing, that you try to show other communities, look, we do like that, we do like this, and we feel respected and valued and heard. So if you want to do the same, this works like this. On the other hand, we have other strategies that may create social friction, that may create polarization. You know, in Turkey, that Turkish society is characterized by a very particular reality. Any political system that is in place, or that would be in place or will be in place, or that is progressing, needs to take into consideration Turkey's past. And by Turkish past, I mean Tanzimat, I mean the Turkish Republic, I mean your sociological approaches, your religions, your views, your geostrategic position, because you're surrounded by a myriad of very interesting case studies for international relations, but which are not exactly the most successful democracies or the most stable scenarios. And therefore, we cannot just think that securitization issues in Turkey are exactly the same as in Portugal, for example. For Portuguese people, fortunately, as you may imagine, Syria is not an issue, right? Russia is not an issue. Iran is not an issue. Saudi Arabia, many Portuguese people would not even know that the country exists. You see? So we cannot compare securitization needs or perceptions about, for example, the role of the military in Portugal and in Turkey. And when we talk about democracy promotion, that happened, and I will conclude with this, that happened with Turkish accession to the European Union, the redefinition of civil-military relations, for example. The European Union demanded Turkey to follow Western patterns of civil-military relations without taking into consideration that the military has played 4 centuries a very different role in Turkey, in the Ottoman Empire and Turkey. Very different from what happened in Portugal, Spain, France, Italy, for example. So these things should be taken into consideration. So there are these theoretical models, and then we should, well, choose and look at very specific case studies. And I will wrap up like this. Thank you for listening and to pay attention to this discourse. And well, I'm more than available to reply to your questions and comments. And thank you very much, all of you.
Yeah, Andre, thank you so much for this inspiring speech. I took so many notes, but I don't want to abuse my position. Maybe I should just ask my short question first, so that my students and my colleagues also think about their own questions. My question will be about Viktor Orban. So
okay.
He was talking about liberal authoritarianism. If you are listening to his speeches, emphasizing that liberal democracy is becoming, is trying to impose itself on Hungary and other countries with this communist legacy. So do you think that they will be able to consolidate their democracy and become part of the core Europe at the end? Or will they accelerate European democratic backsliding? And when I look at the global strategy of the EU, I see that they are talking about resilience and principled pragmatism, which is interpreted by some analysts as the EU's will to protect its values rather than promote them in the international arena. So I was really curious about your position and opinions on this.
Yes, yes, thank you. Thank you for beginning with an easy one. Thank you, Didem. Yes, Hungary and Poland are very, very, I would say, tricky cases within the European Union. So several things about those issues. First, Hungary is the first non-democratic regime, and I mean evaluated by international organizations as such within the European Union. So I think that, yes, the European Union should pay more attention right now in this moment within its borders, because as a normative power, that would be completely hypocritical by the European Union to say, well, democracy is the best model that there is, and then except for Hungary, which they have their own system, right? So first, the European Union wants to, well, I'm a Euro enthusiast. I really like the European Union, and I'm really glad that we are within the EU. But I'm a very critical for several reasons. And the European Union has a global actor agenda and narrative, and I understand it should have, because otherwise it just become irrelevant. Just inside brackets, this morning about Syria, the European Union has not been mentioned once by any of the academics. So that you can assess that we were, like, say, 6 academics talking about issues. We have an audience of like 50 people asking questions. And my final remark about the event was precisely this. We've talked about Canada, Australia, we talked about Turkey, obviously, Russia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, the United States, Brazil, China, but never about the European Union. So the European Union, in terms of democracy, I think that it should look inwards within its boundaries, and then just try to progressively, because as a normative power, that's all the European Union has. So the European Union has lost the only effect that it had, so which is kind of sad from my perspective. So yes, on the other hand, we should look at Hungary as within this broader wave of autocratization. It's not a single case. Unfortunately, the whole world is full of liberal, illiberal, hybrid, whatever you want to call them. They are not real democracies. And when I say real democracies, I say that people's wishes are not respected, that there is an environment of self-censorship, for example, which is something much less obvious than, like, let's say 15 years ago, you would have censorship or no censorship. Now we have disinformation, you have fake news, and you have the blockage of social media, which you in Turkey know very well of. So these are different strategies, not so typical, not so well, recent, and we need to deal with that. So I would say that Hungary is within this wave for the same reasons others are, and more importantly, the European Union needs to really try to understand what is happening in Hungary to prevent it from happening in the rest of the European Union, and trying to support Hungary as well. But at the same time, I would say that the European Union should be harsher on Hungary, because the idea is that, and I don't think that European Union is like of a neo-colonialist empire or project. I just say that we are a voluntary international organization. So if you want to stay within, you should embrace our values, because otherwise it doesn't make sense. And that's why I was so happy about Brexit, because you either embrace what we believe in, or we do not need to be enemies, but you don't need to be within, because you're just creating havoc, chaos, which just doesn't make sense. Europeans have not created the European Union to accept different visions, let's say dictatorships. And then what is the European Union? Is nothing, right? So looking inwards first, trying to understand what's happening, what is disintegrating or this lack of identification with democratic standards. I mean, we know the historical past of Hungary, but we also know that Hungary is part of the European Union since 2004. So almost 2 decades afterwards, Hungary is looking at alternatives. This is very serious because Hungary is no different, is no more, no less than Slovenia, than Slovakia, than Portugal, than Spain. We never know what may happen, right? So looking inwards, trying to understand the reasons, being harsher on Hungary to prevent other copycats and imitators. And then, yes, saying that we try to promote democracy and human rights. That's our voice. But without double standards, which is another problem of the European Union. And you in Turkey know that very well, because the European Union has been many times unfair to Turkey for this lack of coherency and for double standards. And this cannot happen. This cannot happen, not with Turkey, nor with anyone else, because the thing is, like, again, parenthood. If you say to your child that he or she can't do something, but you are doing it, you lose your authority, your legitimacy. You won't ever be respected. That's exactly the same. And I'm almost quoting Alexander Svent, anthropological, anthropomorphic characteristic of the states, right? Like, states are like people. You cannot have well, I'm not mentioning the Sofagate, which was kind of a very interesting diplomatic moment, but you cannot have Miss Ursula von der Leyen saying that democracy is the best option for every one of us, and then and Hungary saying that maybe it is not, right? Because she's representing everyone, including Hungarians, who do not believe that democracy as it is may be the best option right now.
Thank you so much, Andre. And it is very ironic and paradoxical that Hungary is not withdrawing from the EU. It prefers to remain within. This is also paradoxical.
Yes, because there are lots of there's a lot of incoherences in these populist discourses. You know, I mean, we don't want the European Union, but we don't want to leave. But we want European Union funding and the voice that it gives us internationally speaking, but we are not accepting its own values. So this is a lot of incoherence, and I think that's a mark of authoritarianisms and populisms in general, because they just say what people want to listen, even if it doesn't make sense. We have to respect certain ideological preferences as being coherent, right? Let's say communism. Communism, either you like it or not, is very coherent. You may feel identified with the ideology or not. Liberalism, the same. Many other ideological options. You can like them or not, but you cannot accuse them of being incoherent, because they are not. They are coherent. But populisms and demagogy and dictators, they do not have a rationale, a philosophical background. They are like, let's say, they seize the opportunities. So you're afraid of unemployment, so employment is what you get. You are afraid of refugees, so protecting against the refugees is what you get. You like the European Union, so we are in. So you don't like it, we are out. If you like NATO, we are in, and so on and so forth. And this is not coherent. This is just opportunistic. It's just they're seizing the opportunity just to be popular, and that's exactly what's happening there, including with their belonging to the European Union, because you've never heard any Hungarian threatening leaving the European Union, because they do not have the negotiation power the UK has. So it would be very costly for Hungary to leave the European Union. They would leave it proudly, but things wouldn't go well for them.
Thank you so much, Andre. And they are also very inconsistent towards globalization. They are not always anti-globalists. I see that they are sometimes trying to establish a global alliance of anti-immigration, for example. So
Yes.
they're also globalists in a sense,
Yes.
selective globalizers. Are there any questions? So the floor is yours.
Mind if I start?
Of course.
If you don't
My
mind.
colleague Evren is going.
Hello, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, Andrea. It was nice to see you and listen to your presentation. Many thanks for that. Slightly off on the tangent, a question I have, because during your presentation, you also mentioned about the issue of probably trust, because voters, and actually the rate of turnouts, democratic turnout rates, begin to diminish. And you also mentioned about the rise of or re-rise of authoritarian attitudes. The last time we said it, the last time we saw such a problem all around the world, if I didn't get it wrong, you said it was 2001, right? Yeah. So what happened that turned the tide from democracy towards authoritarianism? This is the simple question, I guess. The other part, it's a more, a rather more constructivist question, as you may imagine, as I imagine you might like it. Because in 2010, I was a student in the School of Oriental and African Studies in London. And as part of a homework, I asked several people about the parties they vote for, about the parties, political parties they believe. And the answers I get was really interesting, because almost none of them was really trusting or believing in their role, the party's role. And I sensed a real dissociation between the parties, between the political parties and the voters. And then in 10 years' time, now I see such kind of dissociation between the voters and the parties all around the world, and hence the rise of populism. But I can expand the issue of dissociation. It's not just about the issue of trust towards political structures, but also people start to disbelieve science and scientists, the corporations, I mean, many things. Because this is why I think that modernity as a whole, the institutions of modernity as a whole, rather than democracy itself, are being put into question. People are dissociating themselves with the institutions modernity gave them and promised them. So I sense a general kind of dissociation. I don't think that it's just democracy. So hence the rise of populism. So I just wonder, what do you think? And lastly, it's not a question, sorry. Lastly, we might start a project about this in the short run, and I would be glad if you can be a bit part of it, and Portugal, and through Portugal, and you can participate in our project as well. So sorry for the long, commentful questions.
Thank you very much. Yes, I'll be more than glad to participate and to work with you on these issues, which really interest me. I mean, this is not my hot topic. That's democracy and Turkey. not necessarily associated, but also are actually my preferred topics, and IR theories as well. So thank you. So you don't have to apologize, because there's no fast or easy way to ask these questions, which are actually the $1 million questions. What is happening? What your comments point to this? What is happening? And I would say that you've touched several possible explanations. And this is so complex, because we cannot use well, a simple causal effect saying like A caused this. Unfortunately, it would be much easier to identify and to solve. So there are sets of lots of questions, and you mentioned a lot of them, like dissociation, lack of identification, access of information, because we know what political parties do right now. 30 years ago, people voted for a party just because, well, for I'd say like the charisma of the leader, for ideological purposes. I'm a worker, I vote for a worker party. I'm an entrepreneur, I vote for a liberal party. It would be as simple as that. But now people start to question. Electoral behavior is much more volatile these days. I vote for a left party right now, tomorrow a right-wing party, and afterwards a center party, which makes it much more unpredictable. My grandmother, for example, she always says that she has voted in the very same party in all elections that she has participated in. She's 85 years old, so as you can imagine, she has lived much of her life within the dictatorship in Portugal, which just ended in 74. So you see that this learning process, so she will vote in the very same party forever. But you know that her children and grandchildren do not think like that. I was born in democracy. I know that we pay attention, we look at the proposals, and we can choose. So this means that we have access to information, which means that we are much more demanding. We are not just so blinded. I mean, I see what political parties are doing. I've just seen that they have blocked a bill, a proposal that would, let's say, block the possibility of corruption within political parties, for example, right? I mean, I saw that. This resonates in me. But we also have, well, this would be simple. Okay, people have information, good, they will decide and they will be more informed. But we have disinformation at the same time, and fake news. And so when you mention the scientists, for example, when we say institutions, and institutions, I mean political institutions, scientists, civil society organizations, at a certain moment, you don't know where to turn, because, well, I've discovered that this charity organization that I used to support, well, they are marked by corruption. Or I thought that this politician was clean, but we've just now found out that he had some issues in South America. So the thing is that it's lots of things. Populism just feeds from this, as National Socialism in Germany in the 30s just was a result from the crash of the Wall Street and the hyperinflation crisis in Germany. So Hitler was doing back then very cleverly, because he was very smart in this sense, that saying, you have problems, I will solve them in my own way. Don't worry, don't need to worry about that, because I have my strategy. So populists are doing exactly the same thing, right? I'm sending back refugees. So I'm solving your issues. You don't have a job, but without refugees, you'll get one, right? So the thing is that, and this is kind of all of these mixtures of lots of information. You have access to all the information in the world within your hand when you have your smartphone. But at the same time, a high percentage of that information is fake. And then you look to political parties or to scientists, and then you start not trusting them. So the $1 million question is exactly what you mentioned, like trust. How can we make trustful institutions, right? And the thing is, I don't think that we can. The only possibility is just to reinforce, legally speaking, for example, making, let's say, for example, corruption a very sanctionable, very heavy fines and penalties against corruption, for example. That's the only possibility. You cannot trust in this sense, like human nature. You have to say that, okay, if things go well and the person is not corrupt, great. But if he or she is, the system will correct it. So I don't trust that person, but I trust the system. That was the hope of many Americans, Northern Americans, in relation to Donald Trump. I don't trust that person, but I trust in American political institutions to control him somehow. And that's actually worked out. So from my perspective, the more mature institutions are, and the stronger the rules and procedures and checks and balances, I would say that checks and balances system, the more secure people will feel. Look at the American case, for example, and look at other dictators. As you know, dictators do not have checks. They eliminate them. That's the first step. Well, all of us in political science and international relations know that if we want to become a dictator, the first step is to gather support. The second step is to eliminate possible threats. And then the third moment is just to rule however we please, right? So if we do not give that possibility, right? I mean, we have a person we don't trust in as a president or prime minister in Hungary, for example, but that's all right, because we will have 300 members of the parliament controlling that possibility. That's all right. So this is kind of a bad time that will be replaced in the future. And since we have political cycles, in the next 4 years, then we will correct our mistake when we trusted in that person. Again, the United States example is very clear of that. Many people supported Donald Trump, okay, and it's legitimate. It's their legitimate choice, except if the Russians have interfered. But many others have said, oops, I am sorry that I have voted for this person, not anymore. Okay, so this, and also we have lots of other things like reinforcing these socialization processes. Erasmus program is brilliant for that. It's brilliant. Tourism is very good as well, but academic tourism and Erasmus program is brilliant because you are feeding people with alternatives. Say, well, this doesn't have to be like this. I should be able to say what I think about this issue because there's nothing in nature that would forbid me to do that. And I'm legitimately holding a sovereignty. So you are representing me. I am not a person that you command, right? It's exactly coming back to the Greek original idea of democracy. We do politics, but we don't want to do them directly. So we choose you to do that on my behalf. That's kind of, if you think about it, it would be kind of an humiliating position, right? I mean, I am your servant, the politician, theoretically speaking, right? You don't want to do politics, I will do them for you. So this thing of trust is very important. I would say reinforced institutions from the bottom. Those top-down strategies have failed everywhere, as you know. So bottom-up is the solution, from my opinion, in my opinion, obviously, bottom up, reinforcing the rule of law, checks and balances, all the democratic principles that are already there. We don't need to make up more concepts and principles. Legality of administration, rule of law, equality, all the democratic principles, accountability, responsiveness, vertical and horizontal accountability. That's all that is, right? It's vertical accountability with that we cross-cut with horizontal interinstitutional balances. And we have a lunatic, but we have other sensitive people surrounding him saying that, I'm sorry, that won't pass. You shall not pass. So that I think that obviously this is not an answer, unfortunately, because I would run for a Nobel. But I think that all these variables should be considered. I mean, reinforcing civil society, reinforcing institutions, and adapting 19th century institutions to 21st century institutions, which is also very important. How? I don't know, actually, but adapting that, because they were created in the 19th centuries, lots of them. So probably it's time to think that things may work slightly differently.
Thank you very much. But to add just one last comment, maybe. Yes, the origin of democracy, the Athenian democracy, but the golden age of Athenian democracy, as Socrates and Plato put it, was the era of Pericles. But just after the death of Pericles, who came? Cleon. And Cleon was the first of the demagogues. And demagogues, which means the leader of the mobs, leader of the populace, the people. Yes. However, the way he communicated with people and the way he harnessed their passionate motivations and distrust towards the established institutions was the beginning of the fall of the Athenian democracy, and more violence ensued. So I kind of sense a similar kind of distrust among the people at the same time in the Greek democracy, in Athenian democracy as well. So that's what I feel. That's what I fear, actually.
Yes, of course, yes. I was philosophically speaking, right? The concept, the origin, that idea. Yes, but obviously, yes, thank you.
So it seems like it's a deinstitutionalization, which leads to more populism.
I would say that because that's why I'm not a huge fan of these new trends of digitalizing everything, because we've tested like applications, programs, and involvement of youth. I mean. The idea is that youngsters do not participate in politics because they just care for social media networks, and they will change their app, or they use other apps to participate, to vote in political legislative bills. I mean, I think it's just naive. Using the mobile phone, okay, it's kind of a very big strategy, a very important strategy, but it doesn't match, because you need to be motivated and you need to respect people's wishes, in the terms that we've established a social contract, according to Rousseau, right? So the thing is that we created that contract and we said, well, you do that on my behalf. I will vote, I will control, I will participate in some organizations if I want to. I mean, we cannot, I'm just giving my personal opinion on this. I don't think that we should get too excited about this idea of forcing people to participate politically. Like saying every single day we should be paying attention to all bills and all political issues of your country. It's not your responsibility. You should pay attention, you should read, you should of course, but that comes from education. It's not something that you will force people to choose. You have to choose, you have to vote, you have to write law proposals, to take pictures of your problems, of your public electricity, and send them to the city council if you don't want to, because it's not your job, right? So there are, we should think about other ways. I don't know which ones, but other ways.
Dear Andre, thank you so much. And when you said 2001, we know how the story went. So should we expect Biden, who is emphasizing, for example, fight against corruption as a very important part of US foreign policy, will he be a, how to say, hawkish democratizer in the world?
Well,
by force? Would you predict something like that?
I think it's too early. I think it's too early. Biden has presented like a very different foreign policy for the United States, but that does not necessarily mean being multilateral. Does not necessarily mean being cooperative for promotion of democracy and human rights. Means the US being where it needs to be to reinforce its dominant position without before it is too late for the Belt and Road Initiative, for example. Right? So I cannot predict them. Well, obviously, well, it's not that obvious, but I can assume it publicly that I would rather have a Joe Biden rather than Donald Trump. It's my personal, political, ideological, whatever you want to call it, view. But on that regard, I don't think that either Trump or Biden would be a safe choice if you want to see United States that are really worried about the stability of the international system, the promotion of human rights and democracy, rather than their own interests. Because a more active foreign policy, multilateralism, does not necessarily mean that. We have to wait and see what kind of conditions does Biden present for that, the cost of that presence. That will be very interesting to analyze.
Yes, and the EU seems to be interested in learning how to speak to illiberals.
That would be a very good skill for workers in the EU, right? How to talk to them, how to persuade them otherwise, I would say. That should be considered in the programs to accept interns right now. Yes, I would say that that's the EU. I'm afraid that the EU is completely lost in these regards, unfortunately, and it saddens me to say that, but I think it is. I think it is for several reasons, which I think that are more directly related to internal organization. The treaties need to be changed, but this is a very difficult moment to change treaties. I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't advise any politician to suggest that, because we are in very fragile times, and changing the Lisbon Treaty right now, I think it would be committing suicide. But the treaties need to be changed as soon as things are or become, I hope, quieter or more stable in terms of political frameworks. But I'm always an optimist, and I know that we were not counting on September on 9/11, and it changed the international system in a couple of hours. So we should take some cautious when it comes to say that, oh, this won't happen, or this will certainly happen, because we never know. We never know when there is a distribution of power. We don't know when China will start collecting its investment, for example. It may take 5 years or 50. And this timing will make a huge difference. And we don't know how Russia will position itself. Will be more aggressive now, or will wait a couple more decades? We don't know. So these things will have a huge impact on several things. Well, COVID-19, as a very good example. We were focused on many other things, and we reorganized our focus, our attention, even in terms of European Union's integration. We are now talking about integrating the management of health policies in the EU. Why? Because this happened. If this hadn't happened, the European Union member states would never consider giving part of their sovereignty in terms of managing health policies. So you see, so were we counting on that? No, we were counting on social security, which was put aside to focus on health. So history brings its surprises, and so let's see what may happen.
And I think it's not a coincidence that it is called Lisbon Treaty. It took place in Lisbon. So Portugal plays an important part in the subnationalization of European integration.
Yes. Portugal usually tries to mediate, and I think we have kind of that role in diplomacy in general. Just to be the nice guys to try to bring everyone together. That's usually the position of Portuguese diplomacy.
You said that many countries that are bothering us, or non-state actors that are really troubling the voters in Turkey, are not really a problem for Portugal. What is the problem for Portugal right now? What is
it's security issues. I would say that's none, to be really honest. No, that would be
wow.
No, the thing. Defense and security issues in Portugal, fortunately, are not. I mean, I'm not talking from my perspective, because I'm an academic. I study international relations, so I'm a very specific exception. And our colleagues, and let's say elites in general, or the Ministry for Foreign Affairs, obviously. But if you talk to the general public and say, like, what are you afraid of? Well, they would say things like unemployment, pandemics, I don't know, crisis.
Climate change.
Climate change, even terrorism, just to be a little bit far-fetched in the reasons. If you look at the Eurobarometer and you look at the concerns of the Portuguese, you look at those. I mean, say now the pandemics, unemployment, terrorism, to say the least. I mean, but as you can imagine, for a common Portuguese, Russia, well, it's so Russians will have so many other things to deal with before they get to the peninsula. I think we are safe for now, right? I think it's kind of that vision that we do not have. That's why I think it's unthinkable to compare Portugal and Turkey in many issues, because on the other side, Turkey lives under a continuous sense of securitization, of fear or danger. Of course, I have to say this, and I'm sorry, but a very big part of that is influenced by official narratives, and they are disproportional. But on the other hand as well, we need to accept that there are real dangers and real threats to Turkey because of many things, but mostly for your geostrategic position. Okay, and also because of Turkey's ambition in the Middle East, in the world, which are very legitimate, but which come with a cost, which is not a Portuguese case, as you know. We don't want to be the regional leaders of Europe, so we are just happy of being some wide coast here in the Atlantic. That comes with a cost, and in the case of Turkey, if you join that to some current political situations, you have a very serious context. I would downgrade the security challenges, of course, because I think they are inflamed by an official narrative. But we cannot ignore that dimension, as we can in Portugal. In Portugal, we are always demanding the government to diminish the budget for military and defense. because people do not perceive threat. It's kind of again, that's why I'm a constructivist. It's a question of perception. People do not perceive a threat. Okay, so even Chinese. They used to be a bigger problem for Portugal than they are right now. In the crisis in 2008, 2010, when we had lots of Chinese in Portugal destroying our textile industry because of all those prices and dumping policies, they were considered a serious threat to Portugal's security, not military speaking, but economically and so on, but not anymore right now, even though people in general are not aware in Portugal of Belt and Road Initiative, for example, which they should be, of course, but it, in terms of perception, is not an issue.
Portugal sounds like an exceptional case when we take into consideration the global spread of securitization.
Well, I would say that we have there are other countries like Portugal, but as you know, that's again a set of very many variables, right? Our geographical position, our belonging to NATO, belonging to the European Union, we do not have big ambitions that would confront regional or global powers, for example. Portugal does not confront, doesn't confrontate Russia or the United States. We try to have an harmony relationship. But that's not, I would say that's hypocritical. It's just that, I mean, no one has interest in Portugal and that ends up being something nice, right? For that purpose. And there are other countries like that. But Portugal, I'd say that, I mean, but I'm always referring to popular public perceptions, okay? Public opinion. I'm not saying as an analyst for the Portuguese Ministry for Foreign Affairs, okay? That would be an entirely different discourse. But for common people, if you look, I mean, people are maybe worried about the pandemics or unemployment, but never about Russia. Even, well, probably the North Koreans, if you make people say a name, they say North Korean because they understand that something is going not that well over there. But I'd say the public perception is they have concerns with many other things, but not security threats, not at all.
And I remember that you told me that while Europe is now resorting to far right, Portugal is witnessing the rise of left.
Yes, well, in Portugal, we now have a socialist party in government since 2015. Well, it's a moderate center-left party, so it's not an extremism. The government in the previous legislature, it used to be supported by the Communist Party. The Communist Party was not in the government, but was supporting a parliamentarian speaking the government and the left bloc as well. Yes, we now have a movement, which is the direct translation of the name of the political far right-wing political party called Enough, what we call the Chega, Enough, which is the extreme right that we have right now. We have one member of the parliament elected, but Portugal will not be immune to this wave, obviously. So we have to pay attention to this as well. But yes, so far we have been able to manage these effects somehow, not perfectly, but yes.
I like the word wave you used. I think democratization is also wave-like spread of democracy, and also there are some tides which are going backward.
Yes. You know, Professor Attila Erhalp talked about the timing in Turkey-EU relations, right? I mean, like waves, like cycles. I would say like democratization would also be like that, because there are some moments in history when beginning in 2001, due to a very unexpected event, then you have the decrease in the number of autocracies, a great excitement with democracies, and those prospects, and probably democracies will work better, and so on and so forth. But now people lost their trust, as everyone was saying, and so I mean, I tend to believe that we need the objective is like the economists, is like to reduce the amplitude of the wave, so that we're not just going to all democracies, all autocracies. It's just like, let's try to make it more moderate in this sense. But timing is very important in international politics, as you know.
Thank you so much, Andre. Enes has a question about international promotion of democracy.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, I'm a new student in the field, but I'm trying to follow up the terrorism news in especially African countries, but mostly in MENA region. While I try to understand these relations in the countries between Western countries and the governance or power holders. When I look at the relations, I can't see any democratic values. So I'm really skeptical about the promotion of democracy. When I look at the relations between Western and non-Western countries, I can't see anything. So what do you think about the promotion of democracy in non-Western countries?
Thank you. Well, I'm usually an optimistic. I tend to see well the good part of the equation, but I'll give you the two sides. Well, the first and most important criticism about international promotion of democracy is exactly what you said, which is double standards. If you have an economic interest in Libya, for example, they are not performing, democratically speaking, that well, but you ignore those faults because you have other interests. That's what the criticals of international promotion of democracy tend to emphasize. And I think it's very legitimate. It's a very legitimate criticism. I always try to call attention to this aspect of coherence, right? I've always criticized the European Union's role regarding Turkey, mostly for this. You've promised accession, then you have to put your money where your mouth is. And it's always this idea. Coherence is the backbone of a perceived image of any country. So the first criticism is exactly double standards and not applying the rules of conditionality coherently. So I understand what you say, and you are right. My optimistic vision just wants you to consider a nuance that there are states that in certain destinies, in other countries, may not have those the same financial economic interests, and they may genuinely help or try to improve. And I would say that we have now shifted from what we call a more theoretical political promotion of democracy to a much better strategy, which is supporting civil society. So you are not giving money to the state to improve its institutions because it would be unreasonable, but you, for example, if you look at the World Bank, for example, there are hundreds of projects and calls that are open for you. Let's say we are financing opening like schools, building schools in a certain country. Okay, that is promotion of democracy and human rights, which is an alternative to what has failed, as you recognize, and very well. You say, what you're saying is that the Western countries were not worried about the rebels and the Syrians and the refugees when they trained and armed and paid and supported rebels and terrorists and so on, because they knew what was at stake, and that was their economic interests. So you are completely right about that. So, but there are alternatives to that, and several international organizations are now focusing on that. They open calls and they say, what we want now is to spend 10 million euros building schools or churches or mosques or any infrastructures, okay? And those infrastructures will help. We will give money to, let's say, get together a group of 100 students to come and study 1 year with us, for example. That's another strategy, okay? International organizations, in my opinion, play an important role here rather than states, because international organizations usually, they may tend to look at the bigger picture, unless you are a realist and then you say that it's just an extension of the state's foreign policy. But anyway, that's open to debate. But international organizations tend at least to have that rhetoric, that narrative, saying that, well, we are promoting human rights. And how can you promote human rights? You support and you train and protect and you give lawyers and you teach civil society organizations that promote gender equality, freedom of speech, and all those fundamental values, instead of what they used to do 20 years ago, which was directly paying the states to create infrastructures that were never created. Money was diverted to corruption. Now it is yet, but it's in a different way, more controlled, and I think that's an alternative. So I agree with you. Yes, because of the reasons that I've presented. I also have some hope in these strategies, and I think that we should do something. I'm very Kantian inspired, so I would say that we have a responsibility. And when I say responsibility to protect, is not a responsibility to interfere. It's a responsibility to say, well, if you want, we may give you better conditions. Let's discuss what better conditions are. Okay, so in this sense.
Thank you so much, Andre. There's another question from another student, Ece.
Thank you very much, first of all, for your enlightening speech. We were really inspired by you.
Thank you, thank you.
I'd like to ask a question a little bit in a different way, hopefully it's relevant. Today, countries, even if the countries that define themselves as democratic, suffer from various human rights violations. Not just human rights, actually, the general rights violations, especially the LGBTQI+ rights, or the environmental rights, or racial justice, or even animal rights. So even in the democracy promoter countries. So I'm just wondering that how can or should what democracy concept includes from one era to another? I mean, which concepts are promoted on what basis? I'm just wondering that. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. Very interesting question, Ece. So I would start by pointing at a very contested area again, which is public international law and international organizations. As you know, there are several international conventions to protect animal rights, climate change, violence against women. You have a convention with the name of Istanbul, the beautiful city of Istanbul, as you know, very important one. Conventions on human rights you have, and I'll give you an example which applies to both to Turkey and the EU, sorry, both to Portugal. This is nonsense. Both to Portugal and Turkey, which is the European Convention of Human Rights. If you go to the website of the European Court of Human Rights, you will see, for example, the violations by country, by article, and the decisions of the court, and the execution of those decisions by the states. We all know, and I will not spend much time on that, the weaknesses of public international law. We all are aware of that. Okay, so let's move on. But when I say that, I use your question to underline the role of international organizations. Sometimes states do those violations, for example, and then we have international organizations to call their attention. It happens a lot with Portugal in terms of freedom of expression, and because of our internal law. Sometimes, for example, when you write something insulting another person, Portuguese courts decide to defend those who felt insulted. And then the Portuguese citizens appeal to the European Court of Human Rights and say, Portugal has just violated our freedom of expression that is present in this international convention, in this case, European Convention on Human Rights. So please tell the Portuguese state and its courts that freedom of expression should be respected and protected by the courts, including the courts. And most decisions of the European Court of Human Rights come to the conclusion that Portugal violated that principle. So have you realized what we are talking here? We are talking about a further protection of human dignity above the state. And when the Portuguese state does that, and when the Portuguese state pays a fine to the citizen, it recognizes, it acknowledges that it has not protected this human right that has been protected by international obligations, international conventions, in this case of human rights. We are talking about a voluntary action. So this, if that's what all of you are thinking, yes. But there is a learning process. As we have socialization in our lives, as kids, we learn the rules. The international system can also exert some learning process. Look what constructivists have written about international organization as norm cascades, as setting the patterns of behavior. It is wrong to limit freedom of expression. That's what international organizations say to the states. Of course, there are lots of limitations. There are. But if you look at the public international law in the 17th century with the Westphalian Treaty, and right now in 2021, you will see some progress. It's undeniable. The international responsibility of the state was created in 2001 by a General Assembly resolution. The international responsibility for illegal acts by states is calling them responsible for violating international obligations, which is it's really interesting if you think about it. Is it always applied? Not always. Do powerful states escape them? Many times, but at least they were called into attention. They were identified, and you don't like to be shamed in public. You don't like to say, you cannot talk about this issue because you're violating animal rights all over. So why are you trying to negotiate with us like a trade agreement on the exportation of livestock, for example? So please don't, right? So, and this may not have the impact that realists would like it to have, but in a long term, and this is my optimistic side, we may learn, we may internalize those rules. And I belong to a law department, as Didem told you. So I've trained over the last 10 years lots of judges, and older judges have not had in their academic course, they did not have, for example, European Union law. So sometimes they are judging without having, well, they know that there is European Union law, but they weren't trained to apply that. And they are not sensitive to international public international law, because that was kind of pushed aside in their training. But now we insist a lot in our law students. So they will be, our law students have European Union law, our international relations students have European Union law. So we are now training men and women that in 10, 15, 20 years, when they are looking at cases, they will think twice and they know that we have international obligations as well. So, I mean, I have that this is kind of a new layer of protection. Your rights are protected by your state, they are. But what if your state fails? You have the European Convention of Human Rights, you have the European Court of Human Rights, you have lots of other mechanisms. Are they completely effective? No, they fail a lot, but they are much better than they used to be 30 years ago. So there's hope, and that there's a learning process that I think that we should pursue and insist on. And as a professor, as an academic, I think that we have an important role here, because we are training, we are talking to future decision makers. You will be the future foreign policy ministers of Turkey and your own countries. And so I'm really glad to talk to you in that condition. So, and you will leave this message. You may not agree with it, but at least you will think about it and you will be more informed and you will think about it. So that's my hope.
You are really giving us some hope and optimism. Thank you, Andre.
Great. Yes. Mission accomplished.
We have 2 more questions if you have still time.
Yes.
So Doğa first, and then Melihcan, you can ask your questions.
Hello, sir. Good evening. First
Hello.
of all, thank you for spending this last 2 hours with us and for your comprehensive presentation. And as you know, there is a rising tendency towards populism, and recently populist leaders came into power or protected their positions. So do you think these popular leaders harms the promotion of democracy because they do not behave in favor of democratic ways?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely, for several reasons. And the easiest one, not to take so long, but to be short, the easiest one, well, and the most obvious one is that it's not, well, they base their narrative on what people want in a certain moment. As you can imagine, the general voters are not worried about international promotion of democracy. I think you've never watched to see a community, electorals in general, saying, please increase the state budget for international promotion of democracy. And that has political costs. But sometimes the state understands that its mission, maybe its mission, right, to diffuse values for ulterior motives that we understand, but common voters may not. But populists are not worried about that. They are worried about the political costs or benefits that their decision making will bring. And this is a very easy field in this regard. So you know that you will not get votes if you say that you will spend a part of your budget sending to Burkina Faso money for vaccines or something, you see? So that's why populists harm, as you said, and very well, international promotion of democracy because of this reason, for a start, regardless of what they think about democracy.
Thank you, sir.
So much.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much, Andre. It's like Trump who cut off all this international aid.
Exactly.
Melihcan?
Good night, everyone. Thank you for your significant contributions to us. I'm turning back to a previous question right now. It's a little bit parallel with Doğa's one, but from different point. My wonder is to reintegrate the countries like Hungary and Poland into European democracy. Do you believe that will this happen with the European Union's initiatives, interferences, Or should there be a turning point in domestic politics of these countries? Like, I mean, possible victory of new governing parties in the next couple of years. I'm a little bit asking like a neoclassic realist aspect on that point. Top down or bottom up? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Very interesting. I would say that again, this is what I talked to you about this, what is more important, external dimension, internal dimension. And I think that we should look at, social sciences are much more difficult than natural sciences for this reason. And all the other scientists don't even call us science, but they have an easy duty compared to us. Because human beings have intention in their behavior. So we cannot reduce that to natural causes, obviously. And that makes it harder. And I would say that the wisest answer to that question is that internal dynamics matter because they are the ones that legitimately choose their representatives, and we need to respect that. And as a Democrat, I will always stand for that. Even if it means that Donald Trump becomes president again, I will defend the right of the Americans to choose whoever lunatic they want to choose. However, people, we cannot think about internal dimension without external influences, because we no longer live in isolated islands. The people who vote internally are people who travel, are people who study abroad, are people who have access to CNN, to Euronews, to disinformation, to propaganda, to everything. So it is not possible to isolate the variables, and I don't think it is reasonable to do that. As a scientist, we need to try to choose and try to pay more attention to one over the other. But as the idea of social science is to understand the bigger picture, because I may study the internal dimension, a colleague studies the international dimension, and by the end of the day, we really understand what's happening there by conjugating both. And I would say that yes, the European Union has the obligation for the respect of other democratic countries to force and pressure those countries to recover the quality of their democracies, because the treaties are explicit. And when Portugal entered with those conditions. So it's not fair for someone not to respect the rules of the game and be accepted and included and so on. So the European Union should continue and start to emphasize. There are a lot of legal aspects that we may discuss regarding the treaties, but the main idea here is that yes, the European Union should continue with limited impact, yes, but with some impact, of course. And Hungarians will look at what this government has done and will decide on their own minds, but not alone, not exempted from international influences, because that does not happen at all, probably in North Korea somehow. But in the rest of the world, it does not happen because we are no longer closed islands, and therefore, yes, Hungarians will choose. They may opt for another alternative for their own awareness, but their own awareness is not independent from international, let's say, to raise some flags, propaganda. You see? Well, you can call it propaganda, you can call it promotion, you can call it value diffusion, whatever you want, but the message, what matters is the message. The European Union sends a message. Autocracies are wrong. They are bad and ugly. And citizens listen to that and say, well, Ms. von der Leyen says it's not nice that we have such a government, so probably we will change it or not, right? So it's always an intertwining of all these variables. And I can't even tell you which one is more important. I think that both are actually very intertwined in a way that is difficult to disentangle. That's why it was so difficult to write my PhD thesis about European Union's influence on Turkish democratization process, because what is European Union's role? What has been other international organizations' role? And what has the Turkish society's role, right? I mean, but you, by the end of the day, you can't and you shouldn't, because it's all together.
Thank you so much, Andre. If you
Thank
wish,
you.
if there aren't any questions, we can complete our session on this taboo issue, democracy. I should say it's been really food for thought for us. It's been really inspiring, and thank you so much for your optimism and for giving us some hope about this democratization. And we are now, I think, more aware of these internal, external, intertwined linkages. And I think this will raise more debates in the near future, and we would love to have you again with us whenever you wish. After the pandemic in Izmir, hopefully.
Yes, yes, I miss Turkey. I think I haven't been to Turkey, like, I don't know, like for 8 years or something.
Oh.
No, less, like a little bit less, probably. Yes, but I should be cautious. Actually, it's not.
After the pandemic, hopefully.
Yes,
you'll be surprised to see a different Turkey.
Yes, I certainly
changes very quickly, and so thank you so much. We are so grateful to you. It's an honor and privilege to have you with us.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the kind invitation, for all your questions and comments. I really loved being here. Thank you. And I wish you all the best to all of you for your futures, and hope to see you in the United Nations or wherever you want to be. And just say hello when we do. So all the best to all of you, and good luck with your studies. And thank you. And you have my email. Professor Didem can provide it to you if you have any doubts, if you want some reading materials or anything like that. Just let's keep in touch. Thank you again for the invitation and for your kindness. Teşekkürler. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Andre. You are wonderful.
Thank you.
Greetings.
Obrigado.
Obrigado.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye bye. Hepinize çok teşekkürler. Görüşürüz. İyi geceler.